Hi, I'm Joe, and I was diagnosed with diabetes about 15 years ago. I've always been frustrated by how hard it is to get the numbers I'm looking for out of the various diabetes apps. So I built my own to help me, and I want to share it with you. I'm calling it Steady because that's the goal. So this is the main page of Steady, the Your Day app. The goal here is to bring in all your diabetes data from Apple Health and put it in one easy-to-access place grouped by day. So you can see your insulin and carb data in the context of your blood glucose levels. If you scroll further down, you can see all the detail, right? So all of your boluses, all of your carb entries for the day, steps, right? If you've got a workout that's, in Apple Health, that'll show up here. And they can also log other events that affect your blood sugar, like, pump changes or travel days or sick days or whatever else. You can also add, notes if there's anything else you just want to remember about the day. Then if you scroll up, you've got these key stats for the day. So the ones that, I always talk to my endo about, your average blood glucose or GMI, your time in range, your coefficient of variance. So you can see those for the current day. You can kind of put them next to what they were for each day in the last week. But the thing that I really like here is this day rank feature. So I've basically consolidated those three key metrics down to a single figure to, rank the day you're looking at against your last 100 days. I found it really helpful, bordering on addictive for me to just have this one single figure that scores the day. So basically, if your day rank is better than 50 on a given day, then that day is moving your long-term numbers in the direction you want them. If it's lower than 50, it's it's a day that's moving you in the wrong direction. And again, I've just found it really helpful to have everything distilled down to this one number. Then if we go over to the stats section, you can see those same metrics but on a longer time frame, more like the ones that I talk about with my endocrinologist. It defaults to 90 days here, but you can set it to whatever you want. There's also one of these AGP charts, which shows where over that time period, kind of what the typical range, so the 25th to 75th percentile is of your blood sugar at different hours of the day. Which can be useful just for understanding, where do you drift high or low, over the course of a typical day or week or month. And then below that, I've got, again, those same three metrics, but you can see them 1 week at a time. So, you can see, current week, last week, and so on and so forth. That's how weeks work. But I often find that this is the right level of granularity to see a trend, right? Zoomed out a bit from, the daily stuff, right? Or certainly the hourly stuff. But, I find that over 90 days or even over 30 days, you often lose a lot of the insight. So I found this weekly view to be pretty helpful. Other thing I want to show you here is this badges section. So this tab, keep track of streaks. So what was the longest streak you've had where you stayed in range, and how does that compare to where you currently are? Then you also have these badges. So they keep track of how often you've hit particular milestones, like a 24-hour or 48-hour consecutive streak where you're staying in range. How often do you have 3 meals in a row where you stay within range for 4 hours after. And then also have, you can see at the top here, these goals that reset every month. So there's a goal of having 30 meals over the course of the month where you don't go out of range after the meal, or 5 days over the course of the month where you stay in range for 24 hours. So again, I find myself coming back to this often, checking on these things, and it's just a way to make managing my blood glucose levels more engaging and adding a positive element to it. So I'm not only getting annoyed when I go high and I'm having trouble crushing the high down. This actually introduces this element of positive feedback, which I really like. The last thing I want to show you is the events tabs, and we'll just look at meals, which is the first one here. So really the idea behind all of these tabs is that they're ways of contextualizing your blood glucose data around the real world events that affect it. So looking at meals, each time I have a meal, it creates a card. This is my dinner from last night. So you can see what you ate. Don't get too jealous. How many carbs it is, how much insulin you took, when you took the insulin relative to when you ate. And then you can see what your, post-meal rise and post-meal peak blood sugar was. You can also add a little note here, right? You want to mention, the restaurant that you ate at, or the food was spread out over a long time, or right, anything that you'd want to remember about the meal. The other thing I really like is that you can see stats about your blood glucose grouped by meals. So I'll turn off the filter to only look at large meals. So you can see how often you stay in range by meal, right? So 71% for breakfast, 39% for dinner. You can see how often you go high, in this case 37% after dinner, or really high. And again, this I think can be useful for just like pointing out where do you tend to like have the most trouble staying in range, which might point to places where you might want to talk to your endocrinologist or your diabetes educator about carb counting techniques or about adjusting your ratios. I think generally with all these event tabs, the idea is that they can enable better conversation with your endo or your diabetes educator, right? Rather than, sitting with them and going through CGM data out of context or trying to match it up with logs. With Steady, just all the relevant information is automatically grouped together right there. So it makes it really easy to have a conversation based on real data, which hopefully makes, whatever recommendations you get from them a lot more realistic and useful. So there's a bunch more here, but those are the highlights. Like I said, I found this app to be really helpful for me, and so I'm excited to share it and see if others find it useful as well. If you use it, I'd love to hear any feedback you've got, whether you run into an issue or you have an idea for how to make it better. I'd just love to hear from you about it. You can message me at Facebook, or you can email me at joseph.abel, that's ABEL, at gmail.com. All right, thanks a lot for checking it out.